Hello, my math students. So this is our first video. It's going to be the very beginning of section 1, which is basically a crash course in graphing. So best way to take notes is to put the title of what you're learning. So this is section 1 about plotting points. And the first thing that we have to do is define some vocabulary. So you're going to hear and read the phrase ordered pair a lot. Key in on the order, okay? Order matters. So these are the coordinates to plot points on a plane. So the plane basically is the grid. Okay, we're working with two dimensions, X and Y. And so the order comes in because you have to go in the X direction first and then the Y direction. So ordered pairs will always go X comma Y, or in other words, they go input comma output. I would much rather you understand input versus output rather than stay with X and Y. I know X and Y is the comfort zone, but X's and Y's are not used in real life very often, okay? Very often you're gonna have input and output using different types of letters to stand for what they actually are. So I would much rather you understand the concept of input and output. So let's go a little bit deeper into that. We have to define what input means and what output means. So input, zero in on the in, okay? These all give you little hints. Input is the variable that needs to be known first, okay? In other words, it's usually going to happen no matter what, okay? It's the thing that you don't really control, okay? So another way to think about that is the independent variable. Okay, so it doesn't depend on anything else. The output, and again, focus on the out part of it. The output is the variable you find as a result of the input. So whatever you chose to plug in, the output is going to be the answer, okay? It's going to be the result of whatever you chose to put in. So this is very often your choice because, again, it's not something that is going to depend on anything else. So the input, you have a lot of control over, okay? So before I said you have no control. That's because very often time is an input because nothing else controls time, okay? Time is going to go on. So that's something that would be considered an input, okay? So that's what I mean there. But you will be able to choose what you want to put in for that variable, for those values. Very often, output is called the dependent variable. And that should make sense because if the input is independent, then the output depends on the input. So it's the dependent variable. So you can always phrase that the output depends on the input. Okay, that will always be true. So again, what are we looking for here? We are looking at the ordered pairs X comma Y, or in other words, input comma output. Or now that we're going to the graph next, we have to talk about what direction they're in. So we're talking about horizontal and then vertical. So we always move in the horizontal direction first, and then we move in the vertical direction. All of these things, the order is very important. That's why they're called ordered pairs. So if we make a quick sketch of a graph, all right, most important thing to do is labels. So because X and Y is our comfort zone, I am going to label them X and Y, but I'm also going to label it input and output. Because again, it might not be X and Y. This point where they always cross has a name, okay? This is called the origin. And it should always be reserved for 0, 0. So where the two axes cross should be your origin point. And then the natural setup of the grid is to set up into 4 parts called quadrants. And we start counting in the top right corner, okay? And we go counterclockwise. So this is 1, this is quadrant 2, this is quadrant 3, and this is quadrant 4. And the only reason we use Roman numerals is because we don't want to get that confused with any other numbers, okay, or any other points on the graph. So what's special about the quadrants? The quadrants all have common looks to them. Every point in quadrant 1 is positive, positive, because you would move in the X direction this way, which is the positive direction, if you think about this as a number line, and the vertical direction this way. And again, this will just be a number line in the vertical direction. So every point here will be a positive and a positive number. Every point in quadrant 2, because you're going to be moving to the left, is going to be negative and then positive because you're moving up. Every point in quadrant 3 is going to be negative, negative, and every point in quadrant 4 is going to be positive, negative. And it all, again, depends on your motion, horizontal first and then vertical. So this is the quality that each quadrant will have. Again, it's the order that matters and takes you into that direction. The next thing that we're going to talk about here is the word increment. You might hear, how do you increment your axis? How do you want to increment your x-axis or your y-axis? The increment is the distance you're putting between tick marks. Or another way to phrase that is it's what you are counting by. Now, you don't always have to count by ones. We can skip count, and you can count by 5s, you can count by 3s, you can count by 10s, whatever makes the most sense with the numbers that you have. But when you do increments on your axis, again, labels, very important, okay? You don't want to move on from a graph if you don't have any labels on it. I can increment my x-axis by 1s, let's say. Notice that these are all equally spaced, as best as I can do without graph paper. And whatever I do on the positive side, I have to do the same thing on the negative side. So like I mentioned before, this looks just like a number line. So you're basically just creating the number line with equal spaces. Your y-axis or your output does not have to be the same values as your input. So if I counted by 1s here, I could choose to count by 5s here and go 5, 10, 15, 20. Whatever I do on the positive end, I have to also do on the negative end, okay? Same spacing, okay? Same values, okay? And then if I wanted to plot the points, let's say 2, 10, I'm going 2 in the x direction because horizontal first, and then I'm going up to 10 in the vertical direction. So there's my point 2, 10. If I wanted to do -1, -15, I would be moving over to -1, down to -15. So there's -1, -15. So that's just a small crash course in graphing. Okay. So now we're going to move on to putting everything together. What we're going to be learning in this class is the connection between a formula to a table to a graph. And eventually, you're going to be able to go from all of these to each other. You'll be able to go this way and this way and this way, and you'll be able to fill all of that in. But for right now, we're going to take a formula, generate a table, and make a graph with the knowledge that we just created. So let's say we have the formula y equals 2x minus 3. Again, we're starting in our comfort zone here. The value that has to be plugged in is x. The value you're getting as a result, or that's by itself, is y. So input and output, okay? Those are going to be all of our ordered pairs, input, comma, output, x, comma, y. Remember that x is independent. So I get to pick, all right? We get to choose whatever we want to plug in for x. So I'm going to make a t-chart here, okay, with x and y labeled. It has to be in that order. And we get to pick. Now, there's nothing special happening to x here. All it is multiplying by 2 and then subtracting 3. So that means that I could plug in really any number for x and I'd be able to calculate it with really no issues. I want to go a little bit negative, always pick 0. 0 is the best number, and then go positive. So I'm going to pick -2, -1, 0, 1, 2. You don't have to do this. Remember, this is your choice. I'm just giving you some values that might make a little sense, might be easier to calculate. Now, how do you fill in what's happening on this side? You have to physically plug in. So what is this telling me? This is telling me to plug -2 in for x. Wherever x is, I'm going to substitute with -2. So this tells me that I want y equals 2 times -2. We're going to have a famous saying in our class, plug in with parentheses. You'll see that later, but trust me, that's going to make your life much easier. So we want to plug in with parentheses, -3. So we've plugged in -2 with parentheses. Now we just need to calculate this. 2 times -2 is -4, -3, we'll get -7. So -7 is going to be what goes in that ordered pair, because when I plug in -2, I get -7. When I do -1, I do the same thing. 2 parentheses -1 -3. Do the calculation. 2 times -1 is -2, -3 is -5. That's what goes as my results, my output. Plug in 0, and we should always plug in 0. You're going to see in the next video why that's so important. Anything times 0 is 0. So this is 0 minus 3, which gives us -3. Plug in 1. You guys can see the pattern here. This is going to be 2 minus 3, which is -1. And then plug in 2. We get 2 times 2 is 4, minus 3 is +1. So this becomes our table of ordered pairs. Now, what can we do with each of these ordered pairs? Well, we just learned about this. We can graph each ordered pair. So I can take a look at the numbers that we got, decide how I want my graph to be set up, and then I can plot them. So if we make a quick graph here with our x-axis and our y-axis, one of the most common mistakes I see students make is that they mix these up, okay? That's why we're always talking horizontal first and then vertical. That's very important because even at the end of the semester, I see students that mislabel these, okay, and they go backwards. So this is one of the fundamental things that you want to get started with. I see that I incremented by ones on the x, so I could just increment by ones, no problem here. And I can see that my output is not very large, but I do get up to -7, or down rather to -7. So I want to make sure that I can see that I can do that. Now, you can choose to go by 2s if that makes it a little easier to skip up to -7. I might have enough room here if I make the spacing small enough. So I'm going to go -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, -6, -7. I have just enough room to be able to do that. So -2 in the x direction, down to -7, plot a point. -1 down to -5, plot a point. 0, so I don't move, down to -3, plot a point. 1, -1, and then 2, 1. I can see that this falls on an obvious pattern. So I can connect the dots. Anytime you see an obvious pattern, you can connect the dots. And then this is the graph of y equals 2x minus 3. That means any point on this line, points that I didn't even plot, okay, are going to fall on this line and be able to satisfy this equation. So that's just, again, a quick crash course in how you would plot points and the concept of input and output. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. I'm happy to answer them. And I'll see you in the next video.